Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Doug DeWeer, and I'm the technical advisor for DMLA. Welcome to the 2020 conference. Right now, we're going to go into a roundtable, which is a follow-up to the session we held on Monday that dived into the world of virtual production and real-time rendering. As on Monday, we have Heiko from Epic, Armando from Merkley Partners, and Ben and Roberto from CGI Backgrounds. This is not a presentation style format. This is definitely a Q&A roundtable for the next hour. Unlike some of the other roundtables, we are encouraging people to participate by raising their hand. And the way you do that is to click on participants at the bottom of your Zoom window, and then go over and click raise hand. And we will let you ask your question of our panelists. If you're shy in that way, feel free to go ahead and type in your question into the chat, and we'll try to get to it as time goes by. But the important thing here is that we want to give everyone the opportunity of asking relevant questions, and more importantly, to allow our panelists to really get into some of the reasons that they consider this to be the future. I definitely do. I mean, when I saw this and got a little bit more involved with it, I see this as being just the standard way photographs, especially for product photography, will happen going forward, because the advantages are so numerous. But to make more sense of that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Armando to maybe talk a little bit more about how he perceives this as helping in his process. So Armando, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit more information.
Absolutely. So in the beginning, we were spending a lot of money on photo shoots, and the longevity of those assets were sort of a short lifespan. So we saw that as problematic, and we decided to go fully digital. It just made sense for our account, specifically on the Mercedes-Benz account, where the product, we can easily change it as the cars are changed by the manufacturer, meaning wheels over the years or within that same year would change. And instead of reshooting, rehiring photographers, stripping that into scenes or doing a whole new photo shoot, we would just, at a click of a button, switch that out. So we saw tremendous cost savings there over the years. It also saved time. I mean, in terms of coming up with a comp and executing that comp, it was weeks instead of months of planning. So you plan out, from creative, or actually from the creative brief, I should say, you go into your creative phase, which would take a couple days, a couple weeks. And then from there into production, you're not waiting on anyone. You're not waiting on like scheduling photographers to see if they're available. You're not seeing if the product is actually there in the US or has to be shipped from another country. Everything is just at our fingertips, and we just started production with our CG artists and retouchers. And then, like I said before, the longevity of the assets over the years, it just becomes easier to maintain those digital assets across multiple channels. So social, if social needed a different color for a different demographic, we could switch that out. The different sizes across platforms for desktop, retina, mobile, all of that was achievable by using companies like CGI Backgrounds, where they had, multiple backplates, multiple angles, the domes. You could switch the product around in that little world. And that's it. But we saw it as a process change, a tremendous benefit on our end in the agency world.
Yeah, I can imagine the what ifing part of it, especially dealing with large, dealing with cars, being able to let's see it do this and let's see it do that and let's swap out that color and let's see what it looks like with this, it just the what ifing part of it, especially with the client, so the client can not have to use quite so much of his imagination to see what it is what your vision is going to end up being. It's not a sketch drawing necessarily. It's more like a, pretty damn close to finished. The first time he sees it, it's like, that's pretty close. We got another 10% to do.
And that's actually a great point you bring up in terms of comping. I can't tell you how many times we have a comp where we create, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, you know what? That's not the right angle. Let's switch it up a little bit. We could do that easily. It's like, you know what? We said red, but we really mean silver. And then you could switch that out.
Yeah. Roberto, learning what you do and all the fact that you take a lot of the images that we saw on Monday, shooting for a dome is not the same as shooting for a regular stock photograph. Can you explain just quickly a little bit of the differences that a photographer has to be aware of if he's going to be shooting for domes versus a more traditional, flat image?
So let me just give some information that matches to what Amanda was saying. So I worked as art director in advertising, and then I quit and created my own photo studio and started shooting. And I shot people, so I told stories in general with my photography. And every year my revenue went up 25% until the little crisis hit us 2009, like a year later than USA and Germany. And then my monthly contracts that I had for my studio went from 10 to 1 a month. So my business just died within 1 month. And then within 3 months, I got rid of my complete studio, sold all my gear, everything that I had in the studio, and bought me a medium format camera, a Phase 1 P65 Plus, and got me a rig from Novaflex and learned how to shoot domes and plates, and then started doing renderings with VRED. So that process just developed that idea in me that this could be a good way to my next business idea, sort of. So from there on, I started, and that was beginning of 2010. In general, when you're shooting any kind of subject, whatever you're shooting, you get better in shooting that subject. So you learn more about the subject you're shooting. So if you're becoming a fashion photographer and you look at your fashion photography 2 years ago, you may not like it, but now you think it's pretty cool. And I think you need like 3-4 years until you really are very good in something, no matter what you start doing. So after that time, you establish your style and how you shoot something. And I would say now what we are doing, you're not finished after 4 years because the market is continuously moving and there are new technologies showing up. So you sort of always have to move with it. It's not like after 4 years, I established my look in my fashion photography, and now I'm just going to reproduce that sort of in a way that people hire me for what I do. And that's like how you get hired as a photographer, that you're able to reproduce yourself for what you're doing. And that doesn't count to us. Like, we always have to get further and figure out how can we make things better. So if I think about domes that I shot in the beginning and how I shoot them now, it's totally different. And that's 10 years span. But if I only look like 3 years back, it's already different. So how we process a dome now is completely different than we process it 3 years ago. So I'm going to all the raws and reprocessing the domes from early on and replacing them in our database.
What I found fascinating in listening to you describe the process is how, when you're shooting a dome, especially a backplate, is you have to compose without having a subject. I mean, you're literally shooting, like, there's going to be a car or some product placed into the shot. So when you're shooting it, you're kind of making sure that what you're shooting isn't drawing so much attention that it's distracting from the potential object you put in there. So it's almost like you have to have a great imagination to say, this will look great once you place my car. Because I see some of your shots and I go like, okay, I don't get it. It's a driveway. Like, why is that a valuable photograph? And then Ben will correct me and say, no, that's a wonderful photograph because he sees, the final version of it.
In the beginning, when the people start shooting, for us, or even then you are in a city and you see architecture. So what you automatically do, you point your camera a little bit up towards the architecture. So that misses the point for the car because you're shooting over the car. So you got a little bit road and then this great architecture. And some photographers even do that after 5 years. They still don't get it after 5 years. They're too stubborn to say like, okay, I really have to focus on the product. So I'm going to shoot into the horizon or even slightly down to get my product, depending on if I want to shoot a sedan, a sports car, or an SUV. So that's what you have to focus on. And that's just a learning process, doing it again and again and again, and trusting yourself that you're doing the right thing and not like, oh, but I want to have this building so the image looks great. Right. No, that's not the point. You don't want that full building. You want a part of it where your car is in, and the car is later going to be the main actor. Just like for in architecture photography, you shoot part of the city, but your one building is the main actor. So you photograph that building, but all the buildings next to it don't really matter. They're like part of it. But if you would have only that building somewhere in landscape, it would look odd. It would only match good if it's in a city environment. So you shoot in a city environment, but the other buildings are not that important. And so that's like a hard process for photographers to get that out of the head. The background isn't the main actor. It's just a frame for the later product.
Something that Ben shared with me a while back, which I found fascinating, is that I think people are starting to get their head around what a dome represents, and also what these lighting, and I'm not even sure what the right term is, but being able to replicate the light sources that are shining onto the object at the time. And when I asked Ben about, well, what if you have a dome, but you don't have the light reference, he pointed out, well, you can go borrow a light reference from another image and use that to light the scene, as long as they have somewhat similar source points.
The dome is the source for the light. So if you imagine that you photograph a car on location at one specific spot, and you would go yourself to this position and look in any direction from that position, then you would see elements around you. So you would see the whole scene. And so the dome sort of captures everything around it. And now you put in the middle your car. And this way the car sees everything around it. So everything that's reflecting on the car sees exactly this, and that's why you see the reflection of that. And that's why you see a similar light like the photography. So you're sort of simulating the light and the contrast from an environment and put that into an application, and then place your car in the background, and then this dome adds the reflecting, lighting, and shadow and contrast onto the 3D objects as it would have been shot on location. And the only thing that makes it look real or not real, like the distinguishing of it when you render out and you think it doesn't look real, is the materials. So you have to get the materials right on your 3D object. So the materials on your 3D object have to perfectly match that of the real material, so the dome can give you exact the same reflection as of the real material.
Yeah, that was.
So you have to sort of make a material study so you understand materials. So when you work with cars, very good example is the metallic color. So you have a metallic color that is sort of the ground color. Then you have the metallic coat, and then you have a clear coat on top. So the ground color defines the saturation and the color and what kind of color it reflects. Then the metallic flakes, you can select the size, you can select how homogene they are, how homogene they should be in an angle they are, and what kind of color they reflect, and if they reflect all colors or they're monochromic reflection. So you set that all in the 3D app within the material. And then with the color on top of it, the clear coat, you define how sleek is the clear coat. You will never want to have it sleek as a mirror, because then the car would reflect like a mirror, and no car does that, except you have a special big S-Class, for example, that has a piano piano color on it. So the piano color is sort of the effect is a very, very, very sleek clear coat, and this gives it a higher reflection grade and lets it look more, I don't know, more luxurious, I would say. But you wouldn't use it for every color.
Sorry to add to that point. We've been stuck sort of in the past using backplates that don't have domes, and we found that the product doesn't look as realistic, to Roberto's point, where it doesn't get the reflections of the environment. And it doesn't have to be a dome that matches exactly to that backplate. It just has to be close enough. You just need the suggestion of those reflections in the product, and that's key.
Yeah, and that made me feel hopeful, because there's a lot of people that have backplates but no domes. It doesn't necessarily mean that your backplates are not worthless. It's just that they need to be integrated with other sources in order to pull off that effect. Ben, can you tell us a little bit about what effect, if any, COVID has had on your clients and interacting with you, and how they go about their workflow in a world of COVID?
Well, there has been a noticeable change, because you do have limitations on what the responsibilities of clients are in putting their staff and their resources out on location. So where there are traditional personal preferences in how people produce a location imagery, but it's always been a bit of a split, and using Armando as a good example. Our content represents an extension of their creative flexibility or freedom. So it doesn't replace photography, but where there's something like COVID comes up, it's like this is a shift that allows me to continue what I need to do, have the diversity of locations that I want to place this car in, and it allows them to work remotely from these now situations where we're all working from home like this, that you can still do your job, you can still create content, you can still create all of the material that your client needs, and you can do it from a remote location. So it has had an influx during the COVID thing, but it's also beyond that, when this subsides, it's still a viable option as an extension of what you can do as well. So it has certainly had I think a helpful impact for Armando and all the different creative teams that we work with, that they can still create what they need to do and do it from remote locations.
Heiko, you did a very thorough job of explaining, how Unreal's approaching this, and I'm still curious how you perceive this moving forward and at what rate for the quote unquote average production studio to adopt some of these practices, or what would be likely the roadmap they would follow in order to start adopting this sort of production style, for lack of a better word.
I think from a technology perspective, if you listen to everyone that's on that call, there is an incredible sophisticated technical background of how these things work and like what you have to do. And sometimes that sounds like it's a lot of effort to get to this place. And if I think back how software worked about 10 years ago, right, you needed specialists and experts in every field. And it wasn't like you just like grabbed something from a library, you put your product in there. That was tremendous work. It was a lot of effort with a lot of like digital experts that like needed to figure out how this works. What software and technology has done over the last 10 years is like take that down from the massive hardware requests that you have, from the learning curve to actually get something done, down to like giving you literally a template of how to work. And you don't need to know how and what happens in the background of the software. So if you have the right domes and like the right creative mind, the software today allows you to get going on minimalistic hardware. If you have a gaming laptop and you have a creative eye, and we see that with students working in that field with game engines today, they can create amazing looking content. They come really close to like what you would consider a professional image. And like the investment on their side is minimalistic. And that's what you see too with the service providers in that field. I mean, when I remember when we started working with Armando and massive complex requests like building configurators for Mercedes, there was very few companies that could do that, because like what you have to create, and people don't understand that, if you go into an immersive world, in a digital world where you promote products, the complexity is incredible. That's the reason why there is digital photography or digital image creation in the first place. The Mercedes website has close to 2 trillion image assets. If you take all the configuration versions together that are in that website. Like, how do you create that amount of images and control that source and the output and make sure it has the consistent quality that a creative mind like Armando wants to see? All of this is now controlled by software. Like at the beginning, 10 years ago, as I said, there were 2 companies that could do that. Today, you can almost work with any creative service provider in fulfilling that. And the teams working on that are getting more nimble and more agile than ever. And the hardware that you need is like insignificant. I mean, even 5 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, you would have needed a render cluster of dozens of CPUs to like work in a reasonable time frame. And I mean, maybe Armando, you can go into that, right? How long it took to like create an image. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in the beginning of that, and like 3 months production time. And now from creative inception to delivery, we're talking about days, right? And then if you take that into account, what that does to your business and the amount of creativity that you get in that creative workflow is unimagined up until now. I mean, even for me, seeing what real-time ray tracing in game engines has done, and this is like a technology that's now a year old and has changed the production of visual effects tremendously, like allows you to do things that like even I with my background thought was not possible at that time. And that's just progressively getting faster. And the next element that you see coming in that is that it's going away from the static version of those images, and like the creatives now have the capability to think in motion or in immersive and interactive experience right from the get-go. And like when you write your concept, you're really close to the finished version of what you want to promote, which is an incredible benefit in like reducing risk and go-to-market time. And I'm sure that Armando can talk a lot more about that process in the very beginning, how you like build your idea and now how fast and at what quality you get to a result. And I think for everyone that's in that field, that's an enlightenment, and that's an opportunity to build a business around.
Absolutely right. I mean, not to wow anyone, but you mentioned creating images within like days. Realistically, depending on the product, you could potentially export images in like minutes to hours if it's simple enough, and in multiple variations, multiple angles and animations, which is unheard of. Just the amount of time prepping in a studio that you would do prepping in a studio, you could have all of these assets completed. But the complexity of, yes, the Mercedes-Benz configurator, it's trillions. Just the G-Class alone has a million configurable options. Could you imagine creating that for a dealer? It's impossible. Like within the time frame. By the time you're finished, the car's already probably 2 years old.
Speaking of configuring things, you had a chance to work briefly because it was something that was introduced literally as we were putting this panel together, but Generated Photos supplied you with some people, I guess, what do you have to say? You know, I was just curious what your impression was in looking at the quality and the variety of what they provided you.
I thought it was a joke at first. I was like, there's no way. These people are real. They have to be real. I would zoom in. I was like, this is crazy at this level. And it sparked my interest to see what diversity they could export. And they did that as well. And it's like, wow, let's see if we could hit this target for this specific car. I exported that just at a touch of a button on there. And it seems what I'd be interested to see is the rigging of those people, see how much motion and how much just body movement we could get or interaction with our products.
Yeah, like someone reaching for a dial on a dash or someone adjusting the mirror or something like that. I can imagine that would be something that Tyler and his group are probably working on as we speak. I also was shocked when I first saw my first scanned output. I thought it was a joke. I thought that they were just, some guy walked outside, shot his brother, brought it back in, said this person was synthetic, and it is definitely uncanny, scary, smooth stuff that they're working on. But I'm also excited about the fact that someone like you, I mean, we should let the audience know is that Armando worked really hard with us to try to do, and he actually is working on the launch of a new Mercedes model and had put in one of the generated photo headshots into the car, but because of a delay in the launch of the car, he couldn't show it at the Monday session. But eventually it will get out there, and you'll hopefully have a chance to see it. I will make sure if it does make it that I send it out to everybody that attended the conference. But it really was kind of an eye-popping experience to see that person behind the wheel and know that it was not a real person. It just blew my mind. Any questions here? We have one from Leslie to Armando. What drives your decision to do a virtual shoot versus a fully live shoot?
Great question. That mainly revolves around the product itself. What we do before we go into our creative phase, I'll call it. It starts with production, goes into creative, and then goes back into production. We do an angle study of the actual vehicle just to make sure that the product itself shows itself as good as possible. So we start there, go around the car, pick the best angles of the car, come up with an entire mood board of like, these are the angles we want to capture for this specific product. And with that flexibility, it's almost impossible in a real photo shoot with the time and budget that we're given today in today's world. We simply just can't move a car around in a space or at a location or move that car to different locations per se, all for one shoot. I mean, is it possible? Yes, of course. But nobody wants to spend more money if they don't have to. We're doing more with less in today's world. And that's what drives the decision to do this in a full digital space.
Yeah, it's like the new mantra is, the world, efficiency is the key here, getting more out of less in short time. We're all pressed for schedule and time, but being able to continue to put out a consistently good, good work in less time for less money with few people, that kind of seems to be the trend now. I'm also noticing that I'm seeing people starting to look beyond just supplying content, but I know it sounds corny to say this, but supply solutions to companies. It's not just here's the image, you go figure out, what to do with it or how to integrate it into your workflow. These content producers like CGI backgrounds, I mean, Ben can riff on this way more than I can. It becomes much more of a collaboration than it is just here's a website, buy what you want, we're done, And Ben, go ahead and talk a little bit about, how you maintain and how you work with your clients to achieve, their vision in this very collaborative world.
So a typical scenario is that we would have a client share a brief with us and say, here's what I'm trying to do. Touching on what we covered a little bit earlier, is it might be something that is scheduled out 4 months out and they can't access the season that they want to. So we can, from the archive that we have, and it's 450,000 plus images now, we can provide content that is very regionally specific or seasonally relevant, or has certain aspects in it for certain demographic marks that they want to hit. So we can help them as an extension of their own creative team, as not just like what they might have used in a traditional location shoot, a scouting service to go out and just explore and look around, send Polaroids back, they review it, then go out and do pre-productions and shoots. All of that is a singular closed loop with us, where we'll provide research for them that they get high resolution images to plug right into their comps and presentations that they're doing, that when they show a client and the client says, man, I love that, that's going to be great. If it was a different scenario where it was done as a scouting thing or a competitive ad that they'll sometimes use, they'll look at them and say, it's going to look just like this. We'll be back in 6 weeks. And they come back with something and they say, well, that's not what you showed me. It was like, well, that was a comp. In this case, you can show them something and say, yeah, that's it. You can have it on Tuesday, because we can deliver the high res and the support for rendering that vehicle in and be able to help them solve that. Another point to what Armando touched on to an earlier question is why would you do this as opposed to a location shoot, is in many of the cases we're working in, that car doesn't exist yet. So you're creating content for something that is purely in its still pre-production phases, and you've got marketing materials that are ready for further feedback from focus groups, or design deciding, what are we going to release as trim packages as our launch package, or even a little further back, ergonomic, where do the buttons go for all this? All those things are what Armando's team can help visualize ahead of the vehicle even existing, but then marketing material that is very calculated, very well thought out, where it's going to go, all those touch points it has to go, and have it poised to release before the car's even rolling off the line.
That's again, it's hard for some people, including myself, to wrap my head around what this sort of enables you to do. One thing that was pointed out, I can't remember which one of you made the point, was that it allows for very small studios to take on projects that would never have jumped on doing before. Like, hey, I've got this product launch and it's this new, let's say we're going up against Peloton, and I need shots of this device in all these different settings, all these different environments, all these different locales. And, if you're a modest sized studio, just the logistics of doing that are just out of reach. But with this virtual workflow and the use of domes and renderings, a small shop can take on a large project and deliver on it and make money in the process. And that's another sort of game changer, I think, about this technology.
Another point to what you said, Doug, is when we're working with clients, there's the aesthetic creative that we can help them reach with all the different diversity of the locations, but then there's the technical too, because when you've got a virtual environment, and Roberto touched on this with the domes and the importance of what it does as providing the lighting, is once you've established that workspace, say you're one of Heiko's product users and you plugged it into your workspace and you're looking at it and say, there, that's it. That's what it really looks like if I parked it there. Well, now you have the freedom to say, well, that's fine, but now I want it to look better. So you can actually rotate these domes. You can change the reflection on the hood of a tree, or there's a phone wire in the way. So you can rotate things to optimize what you want it to be. So you're creating ideal worlds, not just the literal world. So that creative freedom comes with what the technology brings to it as well.
Yeah, I'm going to put Roberto on the spot. He may or may not be able to whip this up, but in working with him, I was trying to learn more about how domes are made. And he made the very good point, domes are not static. You can shoot a dome, but just like with any two-dimensional, like with a regular photograph, you can manipulate the photograph after you take it to achieve the goal. And he blew my mind because he brought up an image of, I forgot exactly the city, but he had taken the dome and more or less split it in half and then replicated it. So he had more or less this symmetric cityscape, and then put the car in the middle of that. And it was just, like it just, the lights went off, like, oh my God, now you're not only recording the world, you're manipulating the world that you're going to place your car into. So now you have this extra layer of control over how the world looks when you place your product into it. And so it's sort of like boggles the mind as to all the different things you can do with it. And in that same vein for Heiko, we're very much focused on advertising and products and stuff like that. But Heiko, can you talk a little bit more about how this technology is being applied in other business areas besides, photographic, commercial photography for advertisers?
I think a key component that you can't forget, especially in times like that, is the collaboration that it enables you to happen. You can't travel. How Armando, I don't know how you're set up right now, but if you want to work with other people and you're not in the same studio, how do you share your work? How do you work in real time on the same product and communicate your ideas and bring that to a nice finishing, right? That's where this technology and game engines help you to take the next step. They allow you to do your creative work, but they connect you to your colleagues. They connect you to the world through the libraries and the marketplace. And on top of that, they connect you to your clients, right? The distribution channels are dependent on the same technology. Especially when it's based on real-time creation of your assets. If something changes, and maintenance is a big part of any production cycle for anything, whether you're producing a shoe or a car or even architecture, it's you have to be able to communicate those changes as fast as possible. And if you take the last part, like architecture, for example, if a creative mind creates something and wants you to have an immersive experience of what that is, right, an image or a plan can communicate only so much about the project that you want to sell or communicate to someone. If you make it more complex, if you want to build a hotel, resort, maybe a whole city, how do you make people understand what that will be, what impact that has on traffic, and how people interact in that space? Now, if you take that and create it in the digital world and allow people to experience that like it already exists, the conversation changes immediately and lets you either solve problems on the engineering level or solve problems on a communication level or collaboration level right away in that field. And I think where we've seen the biggest successes is, of course, in the media entertainment world. If you take the current problem that there is no music shows, right? You can't go to a big show, but you can use the platforms like Fortnite to have a music experience, and tens of millions of people experience the same thing at the same time. There's no equivalent to that in the real world, and it opens up possibilities that otherwise not exist. And if you take those virtual production principles for the visual effects industry to the limit, now you reverse that principle of using a digital product in a digital or real environment to that you create a virtual environment and place your actors and the other elements that you want on stage and shoot them with a real camera. That's how the latest productions in Hollywood are done. And it changes the paradigm of how long it takes for the producer to see the final product. You see your effects, you see the interaction right on stage in your your camera, the actors can see what's happening in that virtual world around you, and you see that in the success of movies that especially depend on those kind of effects. But I think most people don't realize how much of the world now is enhanced digital or completely produced. I mean, I've met lots of people that ask, like, so where are those castles in Game of Thrones? Well, I'm sorry, they don't exist. I mean, you can travel as long as you want through Europe, you won't find that. The digital armies that we're fighting inside there don't exist. I mean, how do you create something like The Mandalorian or any TV show for that principle that's running on Amazon, Netflix, and wherever, where content is king? Especially now, people want to see, consume things, especially when they're locked in at home, and you need more content in faster times than ever. I mean, it's surprising to see how many shows are being released from one season to the next right now, when you're used to that you had to wait a year to see the next season. The reason why that's possible is because you have those digital production workflows now, where you get like your result and your quality immediately, and you go from one step to the next in a very fluent way. And what we contribute to that is that we make it easier with libraries. Like, digital content allows you to focus on the key element that you need, right? And for Armando or any creative in that field, instead of like scouting the whole world and then reverting to the same places that everyone goes all the time, you now have the freedom of choice. You can go anywhere, and logistic limitations don't exist. I mean, when I was part of production shoots, how often did we end up in the Valley of Fire and shot exactly the same thing that the last company has shot there? I mean, you literally have the markings from Porsche still on the street when you shoot your Mercedes, and right behind you is Volkswagen trying to capture the same environment. Now you send your photographers, and that's the benefit for Roberto, all over the world, right? He can spend his time in Hawaii and shoot a location where you would never be able to bring your car to, and all of a sudden your product shows up there. And that's true for any product, even if you think very small, of when you have fashion shows, fashion production, creating t-shirts in all variations, and like allow you to have a virtual try-on with tracking technology that's being developed. I mean, you can sit in front of your computer and you can see something that you want to buy on you, which solves a massive problem for that industry, because I mean, 30–40% of everything you buy gets returned. If you can reduce that kind of time frame or loss in material, then you create a massive benefit, not only on the communication side, but in the complete workflow and efficiency of how you create, communicate, and sell something.
Yeah, I mean, the applications are I just limitless. I mean, in my past life, I worked with real estate developers, and I was constantly helping them model buildings that didn't exist. You know, they had to sell them in advance. And when you're talking about unit costs in the millions of dollars for some of these high-rise luxury penthouses, you know, what we would charge them was they would just blow it off like that's insignificant compared to what we're going to generate. Just make it look good. And so we resorted to all sorts of weird tricks of, like, you know, getting balloons and elevating the camera up to what will be the 20th floor at some point and shoot the vista, you know, from the balloon perspective, because obviously the building didn't exist at that time. You know, all of that is sort of simplified in the world you're talking about. I asked Roberto to go ahead and whip up that 360 world that he created for the Porsche ad, if you would play that for us, or at least show it, because I think it's important to, like, visually tell people, you know, what it is that we're dealing with here. Go ahead and do a screen share, Roberto, when you're ready.
So here's that environment I think you meant. And here's the original dome shot on the left lane, and then we just replicated it to the other side, except the arrow, and the left lane is still the full left lane, but everything beyond that then is just mirrored. And if you look at it this way, then it looks very clean, and you're now suddenly in the middle of the road, and you have 3 lanes to each side on your road. And we essentially did that for a project for Autodesk. So this is this here, where they placed it in and built sort of a configurated demo within VRED.
Okay, you know, thank you for sharing that, because, you know, it looked so perfect when I saw it the first time. I said, that's amazing architecture. And he, you know, very quietly said, well, that was, I just flipped it and duplicated it. I'm like, oh, how simple. But like, again, very compelling. One of the things that we're used to is that as technology costs come down and production values can go up, you know, this is a general question for all panelists. You know, do you see this kind of production dominating over what period of time? Like the adoption rate, obviously within the rarefied air of commercial car, manufacturers is obvious, but, is there any sort of trend predictions that you can share with us about, where you see this heading and how soon it will get there?
I think a misconception would be to believe that that is out in the future. That's happening today. I think everyone that had an impact from COVID or the general impact of like having to stay at home or work with faraway places, work with subsidiaries, have been impacted by that principle of what you can do today. I would say there are certain industries that were more prone to make an immediate change. So the automotive industry was right up there because like the workflows were so similar. So you switch to a real-time workflow and you just harvest the cost efficiencies. I think in fashion, you see a multiplier right now because like certain elements of that industry just don't work and for the foreseeable future will be restricted. And so there is more need in working with that, and the efficiencies on the logistics side are so prevalent that it makes sense to make a switch. I mentioned the media entertainment industry. I mean, that has like created a disruption so quick that was almost surprising to see what happened there. Like within a year, everyone jumped on this new technology and ran on that principle. So I would see it, you see it everywhere, even in human sciences. We're seeing that people are using this technology to train faraway people now on like how to do surgery in certain ways, right? This idea that you can use the immersive 3D space with a very real looking environment allows one professional on one side to teach someone else that hasn't done a similar surgery somewhere else and where they can get to execute the same thing now. If you think about the simulation space, like training autonomous cars, how do you do that? I mean, you have two choices. You can like drive a couple of million miles and hope that all the edge case happens that you want to see, or you run a simulation. You connect the sensors of that car to a virtual environment that's pretty much produced the same way as we discussed here, and you let that artificial intelligence drive inside there and figure everything out. So instead of driving a year, maybe it's a week of simulation time that you can like force all the edge cases to happen. So it's a technology that's here right now. What has to happen for some of the channels is to bring the infrastructure up, because it's depending on GPU technology, not CPU technology. So that's a switch from like what you use on hardware. There is some training necessary to bring people up to speed and be comfortable and understand like what the differences are to the workflows that you've seen today. But I think within the next 3 years, there will be a massive change against all industries. And within the next 5 years, I don't think anyone will be successful without operating into those kind of fields, technologies, and synergies you see there.
Ben, what's your feeling about this?
Well, I think to Heiko's point, because we all work in the automotive space, you said that rarefied air, that's where we see it applied to where it is now. From a photographer's perspective, it's still a component. It's something that you can integrate into and use these Unreal Engine and different things to be able to create environments that might be components of an environment. It could be, in the case of HDR, supporting components of lighting and reflective things. But I can't really speak to what it would be for other product or for publishing or for different applications in that. But in our space where we work, it really represents that creative freedom. So there's this flexibility to go to that ideal world scenario that you want to create, and this would apply to other products and other applications as well. But you're not limited to the logistics, the cost, all of the things about having, in our case, build physical prototypes or wait for production vehicles to get made. So it's really, as it goes forward for us, that it's about more flexibility and freedom and ease of getting to what you wanted to do was take a concept and create it into a customer-facing image.
Am I dreaming that someday I'll be able to, have a customer walk in, him holding his product, and puts it on my desk and say, I want you to shoot, make a product catalog for me, I don't have CAD drawings. I have the actual thing. Maybe it's a legacy product, or he had never invested in that kind of tech, but he has the physical object. Is there a way for me to imagine getting that into a computer so that I can take advantage of these 360 worlds that you guys live in? Or is that just science fiction at this point?
And with the virtual production stages, you can take that product and just shoot it with a real camera and like LED screens in the background. The way you've set up your photo studio would allow you to do that right now.
That would be the practical approach, yeah, right now.
Yeah, right. So you could do that right now. You can bring your physical product into a virtual world, no issue at all.
So there's no reason.
Go ahead, please. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I'm so confused at times, but you don't need to translate your physical object into a 3D model in order to leverage this tech. You can mix and match these different things to suit your environment. And like you just said, take the physical thing, put it in a 360 LED backlit studio, go at it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you want to harvest the benefits of the freedom that you get from the virtual product, now you have to figure out how you get that into that virtual world. And if the data doesn't exist, I mean, there's ways of scanning or using various ways of like taking photographical representation to get it in. Now we're talking about quality. How far do you want to go? Do you want to animate your product? Like, do you want it to have interaction with other elements in your scene? There's all ways of staggering complexity and an increased effort that you can bring to that level, all the way that eventually there will be digital humans that you have in that field that can interact with your product and like stage pretty much anything you want.
Yeah.
At that case, you will want to have a perfect representation of your product in the digital world. I'm sure that's going to get easier and easier in how you achieve that. Obviously, in complex environment, when you create a product, you would want from the design stage to the final release of your product that to have a digital representation. I mean, that's the famous digital twin that everyone talks about in this world, right? So that should be less and less of a problem. It might be more with like traditional products that haven't been created in that way that you will have to find another workflow of bringing them into that technology. But again, we're doing everything to make that easier and easier, like how you get to that point where you can use that.
Since you mentioned, Armando, do you want to say something?
Speaking of mixing and matching, that example that I had in Monday's presentation of this Sedona pack shot with the SUVs, the 8 SUVs, we did that. The product itself was fully digital, and then we shot with a director domes and a backplate to match that camera sequence. So in the future, we could switch out those cars easily, just knowing that some of the lifespans of those vehicles will go away or need to be updated. So we have everything we need
to repurpose later. It's like you're building your own catalog of these worlds with everything pre-rendered and ready to go.
Exactly.
Heiko, you mentioned briefly about, in addition to putting your product into this backlit 360 studio, and you mentioned people, we saw a little bit from generated photos, they're synthetic people. Is Unreal doing anything in a similar vein?
I can't go too deep into that, so I only say look out for some of the next things that are coming. But I mean, if you look, I'll do one reference. If you look at some of the latest games that have been released and how amazing those characters look in that, right? I mean, there are some games that are so amazing of like the expressions that you can like do with the faces and the way how they behave. And then if you look at the movies again of like what has been done with like keeping characters alive that are not with us anymore, and they show up on screen and are being used like they're still live actors, the same way we're seeing like musicians coming back to the stage that are not with us anymore. So it's like it gives you a glimpse of where the future is going, and like as you mentioned with the way how you see that in the 2D world, it's just a matter of time until you see that in the 3D world in the same quality.
Yeah, I've been around long enough to see these sort of sea changes and how things are happening. And the story I'll relate to just really briefly is I was working with a large creative book company out of LA, the Workbook, and taking their very large, 4-inch thick book and putting it online. And everyone that worked for this said, well, who take the time to go to a web page and look up a page when they have the actual book here? They just flip to the, I go, trust me, guys, in 2 years, you won't even know where your book is in your office because you will be using the computer exclusively for looking the data up. And that eventually came to be what happened. But in this world, in this context, people say, well, it's just so much easier. I just go get the product. I get a set designer. I do it. I'm so used to that workflow. This looks overly complicated. And my impression is that once you have all the components needed, like the human, the artificial human part of it it's kind of, to me, was like one of the big ingredients that's missing. But now that you have the ability to take physical product or CAD, put them into a 360 world, light them very realistically with reflections, and then now we can think about incorporating human figures or faces into it. After you get that flow going and you made the investment, you learned the tools, the idea, I think, would appear almost preposterous in the future for you to say, oh, let me go out and start nailing wood together. I mean, it's just, let me drape this, let me go get the, it's like, let me go hire a model and let's do a casting. And it's like all that stuff that we're so used to will seem like a lot of extra work for not a lot of extra benefit. And I think that's what's going to fuel this revolution, is people will understand that it's quicker, cheaper, faster, and as good, if not better, period. All right, so we're almost at time. We're 52 minutes in. You guys are being very quiet out there. So the authenticity issue is, advertising has always been perceived as sort of it's kind of authentic, but it's actually kind of, the hamburger doesn't really look that good when you go into the store and eat it. They always tend to make it just a little bit better. I mean, is there any, Armando, when you're doing this, does anyone ever raise the issue with you about, that's a rendering, that's not a car, so that's not really a truthful, depiction of what the car looks like?
100%. And I think you get that in every field. It's like you're John Smith that prefers to listen to a vinyl record rather than an MP3 just because of that sound that it has. And I myself, I think photo shoots are great. I love being on them, love craft services, love eating their food. But at the end of the day, it's like, are you really achieving what you wanted in the first place? I can say yes, because I have full manipulation of this environment. I know there have been many times in an actual live photo shoot where something doesn't work in your favor and you're just limited to, all right, well, it is what it is. We can't change the weather, or we can't change the car. So I see it as a major advantage on my end.
I would question though, since the incumbents of retouching, when was the last time that a true authentic picture has ever hit a client? I remember how some of the car photography was done in the very early stages, 20 years ago. You would shoot the car from 3 different angles, Frankenstein them together, and that was an image. So there was no way that someone else would replicate that photo that you see there. Is it possible? Maybe, with a lot of lighting tricks and whatever, but I think that's not a problem of what we introduced with the digital world. That's just a concept of how you represent your product in the first place. Let's just mention food photography. I've never received a burger that looks like the photographer, the photo that right.
No, never.
The one thing I was hoping to get done, but I just ran out of time, is, again, it was very early on in the planning phase. And I said, for the people that argue that, this is a lot of work for not a lot of benefit, I can take my car and drive it out into, the desert and take a shot of it and be back, within a couple of days and have all the images I could possibly want. And I was telling this guy, well, that's true, but what if I contact, what about if I contact, Jeff Schultz, who shoots for the Iditarod, and tell him, go out there to that isolated, frozen lake bed and shoot your 360 domes, bring that and let me put your Tahoe in that location, and you tell me what it would take to achieve that same shot in a physical world. It would be literally impossible to do. And that's another aspect of this, is just your imagination. You're limited by what you can literally take a camera into in order to shoot the world. And Roberto can probably talk a little bit about some of the really bizarre locations that he's gotten himself into and sort of the stunning photography that's come out of it. But what have been some of the more exotic, weird places that you've actually captured the world of?
What I know from shootings, and where I say the advantage is with working digital, that you can manipulate things in a way so you don't have to retouch. So if you have a car somewhere on a landscape area and you have it standing there and you need a specific angle for it. So the reflection you get on the car is what you get. So if the reflection does not shine on the right area from the line on your car where you actually want to have it, then you will later have to retouch it in Photoshop to get it there. With the virtual environment, you just lower the dome horizon. Finished. So you get your result at that angle, and you can't do that in the real world. And also you have a nice building on one side, on the other side is a construction. So you get the construction into your reflection. So what you can do with the dome, you just tilt it so you get that reflection in there that you want to have.
I lost my train of thought here for a second. Oh, I know what it was. And this is a geeky kind of thing, but we rely heavily on people being able to use our website to locate imagery that matches their vision. And it's hard enough to do it with a single photograph. And then when you throw in video, it gets really complicated because you have a time component. Like if someone types in, Karen Terrier or whatever, I don't care what the keyword is, there may be a Karen Terrier at 63 seconds into the clip or 8 seconds into the clip, but it's not there when the video starts to play. In the case of a 360 environment, where you turn one direction, there's a bridge, you turn the other direction and there's a tunnel, keywording that I can see would be challenging, because if you put both in there and the guy goes, show me tunnels, and you whip up, you're going to find out.
So how we did that is like, we keyword the images that go with the domes. So we almost don't have any domes that don't have images. We have some domes that we shoot over a full day that don't have any plates. But then we render out plates out of the domes so that we also have some back plates to those domes. And we give keywords to all the plates. So whatever all the plates from one location see, all those keywords combined goes to the dome.
One of the things that I'm really looking forward to from CGI backgrounds is, again, they live in the world of 360. And one thing I know that every buyer would love to be able to do is to comp their product in the shot before they buy it. And I understand, Ben, and we only had 2 minutes left, but maybe you can give us an update. But aren't you working right now to try to get the ability for people to upload their car model into your website and pre-visualize what it would look like?
I would actually defer that to Roberto, because he's working with the team that's building that. But yeah, it's a viewer that will be in the site that will allow you to do that. But Roberto, you want to talk about that viewer at all a little bit?
Sure. So we have a beta running already, but it's not online, and I can't make any promises when, but we're pushing to get it online as soon as possible. And essentially what you can do in the first phase is going to work for the domes, so that you can place an object in a dome, and you can, usually when you look at domes online, you're stuck to the nodal point where the dome was actually recorded. So it's you with your head looking in all directions, you can't move away. So what we do now, we place a product in the middle of the dome, and you can spin around the car, go over the car, go any way. Oh, wow. And then the dome will have a very normal environment, so it may bend in some areas. And then the next update is that we can give map to these domes so that they match more their physical environment, so you have a better view of that location. And then the next step is to also be able to do that with the back plates, but that's a little bit more complicated, because we have to find a way how we can automatically add surface information to all the images, so that the angle of view and the positioning of your product is sort of predefined, so that that it matches to that environment. And that's much easier in a dome, because you have a 360, you define your angle of view, your camera, and not the image. So it's you making that decision. And with a backplate, it was shot at 35mm or at 50 or at 28, whatever. So you have to figure that out. And you could get that from the metadata, but not all images have that. And the next is you will still have to have the floor. And when you have the floor defined, then you also have the angle. So the floor is the thing to figure out.
All right. Well, I can't wait to see it, because I think it would be a first, at least to my knowledge, it would be a first. Well, we're at time. I want to thank the panelists again for their participation. I hope all of you learned something new. And we have another session that probably already started. So anyway, thanks for attending, and we'll talk to you later.